Hi, this is Dr. Ken Owen with Pierce College, here for another video for Music Off the Record. We're going to be talking about Mozart's Requiem, one of my favorite pieces, very exciting. So you can watch another video that we did about the end of Mozart's life, what was going on, what he'd been working on, and this question of why write a Requiem. Well, the reason Mozart wrote a Requiem, honestly, was for the money. That may not sound good to some people today, but really, especially at Mozart's time, musicians were considered servants. That was his job. That's the way he made a living, was to compose. And so that kind of a commission was something that he sought after, something that was good. In particular, at the end of his life, he was having some financial strain, and he was happy to get this commission. Now, the commission was delivered by a servant of someone of the royal class, and Mozart was asked to compose this without really telling a lot of people about it, which does make it today seem kind of mysterious. And there's this shot on the screen from the movie Amadeus that shows the masked, mysterious messenger delivering a little bit of money along with that commission. Well, really, not that much mystery about it. It's fairly normal. We know now that it was commissioned by, or at least we suspect, by Count von Walsegg. The fact that he didn't come commission it himself but sent a servant, that's normal. Royalty wouldn't go hand deliver a message or a commission to a servant, which Mozart would be considered the serving class as a musician. So very normal to send a servant to deliver a message to somebody like a musician of lower social status than the Count himself. Also fairly normal to ask the composer to compose it without broadcasting the fact that he's composing this Requiem. Now there could be better reasons, like it was intended to be a surprise for something, or, as the case was most likely here, keep it right so that he could steal it, claim that it was his own. As far as we know, that was the Count's intent. We know that he had done this with other pieces, with other composers, commission it, take it, put his own name on it, and claim to be this wonderful composer. Look at this that I have done. So that's what we suspect. So why is there so much mystery and intrigue around it today? There's certainly a lot of scandal and hype. Even went into that movie that we mentioned, Amadeus. What are the things that cause that? Well, certainly the movies like that would do it. Also, just the difference in the way that society works today from back then. The idea of a messenger showing up and commissioning and asking you not to say anything about it. That seems mysterious to us today, even though it wasn't really back then. The other, and honestly the biggest reason for all the mystery and scandal around it, is Constanze, Mozart's wife. It's her fault. And for good reason. She's very smart. So Constanze, we're talking 18th century widow with a couple of children. What are her job options in Europe in the 18th century for a single mother? There's not a lot. And she knows it, and so she's got to find a way to make a living for her and her two children. And she's really smart about it. She puts on some memorial concerts. That goes well. Of course, you can do that right after Mozart passes. And Mozart has this Requiem that's unfinished. The commission was never completed, and so she still has it, and she owns it. And she knows that the more mystery and more scandal that she creates around the Requiem, the more she can up the price. But the problem is it's unfinished. So we first have to have some completion. We've got to finish it off. She finds someone. This is a former student of Mozart's named Süssmayr. You see a picture of him there. You can see he's about 10 years Mozart's junior. He completed it and gave it back to Constanze, who at first, honestly, claimed that Mozart really completed the whole work and wanted to completely dismiss Süssmayr's work. He, of course, wanted credit. There was a little tension between the two of them. Later, Constanze said, "Oh, Süssmayr just completed the orchestration. All the music was there. He just filled out which parts in the orchestra were playing what." When honestly, Süssmayr did quite a bit more than that. There were really entire movements done by Süssmayr. And these days you'll see other composers stepping in and trying to complete what was just done by Mozart. So you'll hear alternate versions as well. I believe the Sinfonietta is doing the Süssmayr completion, that original and most performed one. So then we have Constanze's changing story. Like we said, at first she claimed that Mozart did it completely, then had to admit that Süssmayr had composed some of it. Well, at the same time, some of the stories got more and more mysterious the more she told them. At first, a servant delivered the commission, which is true. Later, she reports that a mysterious messenger that Mozart thought was an otherworldly apparition delivered the commission. So now we have ghosts asking you to write a Requiem. She reported that Mozart worked feverishly on the Requiem. Well, he always wrote at what seemed an inhuman speed. That was just Mozart. He had that facility. That's part of what is people love to learn and talk about him, is this remarkable capability that he had. So that was not unusual for Mozart. Certainly unusual, but not for Mozart. Later on as well, Constanze talked about Mozart having this great anxiety while working on it and being obsessed with his own death. But that doesn't really fit the sound of the music, what's going on there. So let's do some listening and hear what's going on. There's a few movements that do sound dark and ominous, and of course that fits the drama of some of this text of the Mass for the Dead. Maybe even this concept of the ghostly commission and the anxiety over death. But really, there's a lot of music that's peaceful. We even have quotes of Handel's Messiah in this music, which, by the way, would not be considered plagiarism back then. So even though there is some intense music, it's not really the music of somebody that's obsessed with their own death and concerned like this. The intense movements include the Dies Irae, which means Day of Wrath. The Confitatis, that text is about the confounding of the wicked. Those two both have that dark and a little bit ominous sound. The Rex Tremendi, which means King of Majesty, has this big and intimidating grandeur. And all of those are, what we would expect from something dramatic like a Requiem. Let's hear a little bit of the Dies Irae. Especially listen for, I love in the strings, upper strings, the flickering of the flames. So there you hear some of that fieriness in the strings and the big dramatic choir. The Confitatis, so I'm pulling a couple of movements from out in the middle, these more dramatic movements. The Confitatis has this big rumbling low strings to begin with. It's shaking and scary. But then there's a real shift, and you'll hear that after the shaking and scary stuff, we have this text that says, "Call me to thy blessing," sort of thing, and it really goes to a plea and no longer the frightening, whereas some composers have set this to be still a terrified cry out for plea. This is much more peaceful. Listen. And then, of course, it shifts right back to the dramatic stuff. So the Handel infusion, there is some Handel in there, remarkably. So this perhaps is from a little stint that Mozart had as the director of the Society of Ancient Music. That started in 1788, just, a couple of years really before this. He, as part of that work, he reorchestrated and conducted 4 works by Handel, which I guess would have been considered ancient music for Mozart. One of those included the Messiah, and if we listen to the Kyrie, so after the beginning of the Requiem, the introit, the second movement really is this Kyrie, and the theme that opens it up is exactly the same as the melody from "And with His Stripes" from Messiah. Here's the Mozart. Just that much. Now let's compare it right away to the Handel. So that same jumping back and forth motive that he takes from Handel and puts in there. So we see that in there. And then we certainly have music that is more mournful and sorrow, not so much terror and judgment that we might expect from a requiem. In particular, the Tuba Mirum movement, which is all about the judgment. Many composers have composed that to be very dramatic sounding music. And the Lacrimosa, which is the Day of Tears. Verdi in particular, well, Tuba Mirum talks about the sound of the trumpets, so a lot of them start with trumpet fanfares and things, but then often it builds to great big, huge, loud, dramatic settings, and Verdi's is an example of that. But Mozart, much more peaceful and accepting and a little bit of that mournful. Here's a little bit of the Mozart Tuba Mirum. So start off with a solo trombone and then just a solo baritone. It's slow, it's gentle, it's major. We have this big major arpeggio in the trombone after the baritone solo. So certainly much more peaceful and accepting than many composers dealt with that judgment text. The Lacrimosa, a beautiful text. This one actually, I think, has part of it Mozart, part of it Süssmayr. It's one of the incomplete ones. So certainly not tears of fear and trembling. Mozart, perhaps we see a more peaceful, accepting attitude towards death. He was certainly familiar with death. I mean, I know everybody loses people, but perhaps more common then when people died younger, for someone young to have experienced a lot of death in his life. He lost his mother while she was on tour with him, and he was not that old. And he seems to, in his music, have this much more peaceful attitude toward it. So it doesn't really fit that mysterious concept of being obsessed and full of anxiety of a commission from a ghost. So some of those wonderful Hollywood stories make for great stories, but the Requiem is worth listening to on its own and separating from that and really hearing this wonderful contemplation of life and meaning and the peace that comes despite the drama that all happens in Mozart's Requiem. We hope you enjoyed the concert.